I'm gonna lay down my burden down by the riverside. Come on, down by the riverside.
So at this time,
Down by the
I'd like to bring to you Veronica Johnson, who's a meteorologist with Channel 7, WABC. We had the chance to meet Veronica last summer when our conservation director, Eliza Cava, was featured on her program to talk about 7 actions for 7 generations to help us combat climate change. And we were so appreciative of Veronica's enthusiasm for talking about the devastating effects of climate change and her desire to be a part of an even bigger conversation, that she was the first person who came to mind to help us moderate this panel and bring you this conversation from these extraordinary speakers. So with no further ado, please welcome Veronica Johnson.
Thank you so much, Caroline, and thank you, everyone, for allowing me to be with you today, representing Storm Watch 7. As we know, our world is heating up to wanting more climate news. There are significant issues that are plaguing our nation. However, few carry the long-term impacts of climate change. And as a broadcast meteorologist each and every day, I get it. I'm out in the community, I'm on air, I'm delivering that scientific information, I'm hearing what the community has to say, and I'm hearing that the community wants more communication, more data that they can use, more information on climate change and how it's impacting their community, their local areas. But when it comes to the voices that are leading the fight, there are voices that rarely from the communities that disproportionately bear the burden of climate change. So as we talk about a plan forward, a clear plan, we need more of what you're doing here today. We need more of what ANS is doing here today. So I am so happy to help elevate your plan. And I'm delighted this morning, to get a chance to introduce and hear what our panelists have to say for this morning's first session, Politics, Policy, and Promising Solutions. And that is very important. Promising solutions and how we can move forward. So without further ado, let me start by introducing some of our panelists today. I'm going to start on my left. Bakura Shabazz Branch. Branch is the Social Justice and Health Disparities Committee Chairwoman of Virginia Green New Deal and serves as the Integral Policy Community of the Virginia Environmental Justice Collaborative. Sitting next to her, Dawone Robinson, who is Eastern Regional Director for Energy Affordability for the Natural Resources Defense Council. We also have Tamara O'Loughlin, who is North America Director at 350.org, where she supports and is accountable to organizers and campaigners on the United States and the Canadian teams. And next to her, we have Mr. Charles Glass, new Deputy Secretary for the Maryland Department of the Environment, and Brandi Colander. Colander chairs the Board of Directors for the District of Columbia's Green Finance Authority and serves on the Leadership Council for the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies. And in just a few minutes, we'll also be joined by Mustafa Ali, Vice President of Environmental Justice, Climate and Community Revitalization for the Natural Wildlife Federation. So as we begin here, if we can please give a round of applause for our panelists. Each panelist will get 5 minutes to offer their presentation, and then we'll move on to the next, and we'll have ample time at the end for Q&A. So without further ado, let's get started first with Bakura Branch.
My name is Bakura Shabazz, and I am the Social Justice and Health Disparities Chairwoman for the Green New Deal, the Internal Policy Chairwoman for the Virginia Environmental Justice Collaborative, and the Criminal Justice Chairwoman for the Chesterfield NAACP. And I also got a couple of organizations that I have founded, the Criminal and Justice Reform Network and First Alliance Consulting, where I am able to basically sew the intersections of criminal justice and environmental justice. When I first got involved in environmental justice work in 2011, it was because my son has chronic severe asthma. He has been disabled from it since he was 1 year old, federally disabled from asthma. And in my community, they never told us about the toxins that were being released from the coal depot, from industry. And I was devastated when I found out about it because my son continued to get ill. He continued to get worse. They said he will not grow out of this thing. And I'm like, hey, they said most adolescents grow out of asthma. Why is it that my son will not? And it's because of the environmental toxins that are in the air. You won't have a chance. You have to clean the environment to give the lungs a chance to repair themselves. And so when your lungs can't repair themselves, you can't get rid of asthma. And then my now 11-year-old who is sitting here with me passed out at school and found out she has exercise-induced asthma. And just 2 weeks ago, my other young one that's 4 years old, well, he just turned 5, found out that he had asthma too. So I'm devastated by this, and I'm also angry about this thing because we're seeing a disease that used to be genetically passed down. Now people are starting to inherit it, like I'm giving you a gift of asthma. And our environment should not be giving us any gifts of asthma or COPD or any respiratory dysfunctions. It takes a toll on our lives, on our abilities to be able to work. It is extremely costly to our states and federal governments, and we can prevent a lot of this. And so for me, taking a social justice stance on this, and also intersecting how if a person is not able to work, how much more likely they are to commit a crime, that is an environmental injustice. And to put those intersections together, and also when we have industries that deliberately pollute communities of color, that is a crime to me. Even though they haven't codified it as a crime, to me, that is a crime, because if I come and pollute and you get sick, if I do it, I go to jail. And so how do we allow companies to be able to persuade our legislators to allow them to kill us? And that is exactly what it is doing. It is murder, and we need to start calling it exactly what it is. Exactly what it is. And we should also be bold in our stances to say this, because a lot of times people get shamed for being extremely intentional in their advocacy. And I'm one that is extremely intentional. I say what needs to be said, and I do the things that need to be done to be able to paint this picture so people can understand how bad this thing is. Climate change is real, and then we don't even really talk about the fact that Black and brown people are not even fully integrated into what climate change is. When you go into these communities, which I come from, and you ask about climate change, they think it's the change of the weather, it's change of weather patterns. And that is the obligation of our environmental organizations, to make sure that these communities are empowered with the education that they need to be able to go to their city councils and demand their mayors be a part of the Global Mayors Initiative, to go to our state legislators and our federal legislators to say that it's not an option. You are going to take a better stance with environmental justice in our community. And that is what I bring to the table. Thank you.
Good Good morning, everybody. My name is Dawone Robinson. I work for the Natural Resources Defense Council, NRDC. NRDC is a national environmental organization, and we have offices across the country, but I focus on the East Coast on energy affordability, on climate and energy equity, particularly for low-income communities and communities of color. It's always good to be here with you all. I mean, it's Black History Month. I am sharing this panel with, I am sharing this panel with several distinguished Black leaders, and this conference with several people who exemplify Black excellence. And so in this month, particularly in our field of environmentalism, it's very inspiring and encouraging to see. So I am grateful to be here, and thank you all for coming. I remember a year ago where I was, and I'll just share a quick story in my intro. So in my work within NRDC, I used to live in Richmond, and I worked for a number of years in Virginia politics and in legislative advocacy, particularly in community organizations, focusing on climate. And it was at about this exact time, 1 year ago, in Virginia. And for those that are familiar with the politics of Virginia, think back to what happened about a year ago. Our governor in Virginia was roundly criticized and condemned for a photo that had appeared in a yearbook that showed him in blackface, and the drip of other racially insensitive happenings that we have since learned that Governor Northam has been a part of. Every year, the Environment Virginia Symposium happens in March, which is a state environmental conference. And every year, historically, the governor gives a keynote address on environmental impacts. And this was scheduled to happen a year after the blackface news broke. I received a call and was contacted by the organizers of the symposium about a year ago to this day. And they said to me, you know, every year the governor speaks. We are trying to focus this conference on race and equity. Wouldn't it be great if you spoke after the governor?
No.
Exactly. First I thought, yeah, it'd be great for you all if I did this. This could be interesting. And at first I thought about not doing it, but then I did. And the reason why I did, because I have spent my career on trying to advocate for the inclusion of Black and brown voices in this space, because for too often within the environmental movement, Blacks have had a lack of access, a lack of participation, and an overabundance on the environmental burdens and not enough environmental benefits.
That's right.
And so when we get that opportunity to speak truth to power, we ought to take it. And I did. And I talked at length about the history of redlining in our communities and the history of, we heard, intentional segregation and discrimination in our communities, and where that has led to Black and brown communities to this day. And it's not that I am the angry Black man. It is not that I am trying to rile up a crowd, but these issues are deeply personal, and we need to change that power dynamic and bring solutions to people. And so I want to take every opportunity that I can, which is why I was inspired since then, because at first I thought about not doing this, but the overwhelming support within communities in Virginia has just been incredibly inspiring since. And I have been thankful to just play a small role in changing that conversation. And hopefully we can do more of that, because again, the environment does truly, yes, belong to all of us, but for too often and for too long, the burdens have been placed disproportionately on communities of color, and it's time for us to change it.
That's right.
So my name is Tamara Tolles O'Laughlin, and that tends to be the most complicated thing I say in any room that I'm in, so I just wanted to get that out of the way. I am neither Tolles or O'Laughlin, as you can see. This is America. So people ask me, is your last name Polish and then your other last name is Irish? Yes, welcome to America. This is how it works. So I just wanted to give you a real brief bio on my whole life in one slide and one sentence. So all things being equal, if I could put my entire life into a set of visuals, this would be it. One of my core values, my sphere of influence, I do not believe in work-life balance because I'm only here this one go round. So if the work isn't feeding who I am and vice versa, there's an imbalance and then I have to live there, so I don't do that. This last group that you can see on the sphere side is really, those are the folks who I can call in the middle of the night to ask a question so that I can learn something. And I usually say, talk to me like I'm in 8th grade about this thing that I need to know more about so that I can transfer and translate that information back to the community who sent me here. So I want to talk really briefly about how our own history, our Black history of nonviolent direct action is driving the climate movement, and why every one of us should feel like owners of that work and stewards of the message and really think clearly about how well we are engaging in this conversation about what's happening to our communities. Hey, Mustafa, everyone sees you. No shade. So I am the North America Director at 350.org. So people ask me what that means. That means I am the highest ranking Black person in the history of the environment doing work in an organization that looks like this. Other than the man at the end of the podium, that's literally it. We can't travel anywhere together, let me tell you. And it isn't because we are all carrying pieces of this work and are proxies for millions of other people doing the real work every day that gives us the opportunity. In a brief chat, when I said hello to Brandi, she said, hi, how are you? And I said, I've known you for, over 12 years because there are so few of us that it would be impossible for me not to know who you are. And in 2020, I can tell you the most exciting thing that's happening is that that's not true anymore. I'm excited to look out in this room and to go on climate Twitter and to see people I have not run into in a hallway who care about this work, who are doing this as a part of the way that they maneuver in the world. So really briefly, the mission of 350 is what you see on the screen. The 3 words in green are what I do there. So I make the work multiracial, multi-generational, and identity conscious because that's my own success metric for whether or not I'm having an impact. Now, the version of that most people will have seen were the global climate strikes. Raise your hand if you've heard of it. Okay, raise your hand if you participated in it. See, those numbers need to match up a little more than they did. But the idea of global climate strikes, it was my first day on the job about a year ago. My first assignment was to get 3 million people to come out on the same day for climate strikes. We got 7.6 million people to come out on the same day. And the story of that is this many actions, 6,000 people coming out in 185 countries. That means there's only 2 where people decided to stay home. I'm not sure what they were doing, but it's 2 countries. And all of these trade unions and businesses and organizations and 8,500 organizations that turn their websites off to say, get out in the street and stop looking at the internet. So for an organization that is digital native, that does this work in a universe where we're hardly touching each other, that's a lot of people coming out to go, climate change is impacting me. What my mandate was in that space is that the work must be multiracial, it must be multi-generational, and it cannot be ahistorical. So when I started in this moment saying that we're going back to a space of nonviolent direct action is because every tactic the climate movement uses comes from the history of civil rights. It comes from the work of human rights. All of that stuff is Black, all of it. So in thinking through how I show up in that space as the leader of the US program and the Canadian program, I wanted to talk about how when I show up in a space, I'm showing up on behalf of these departments of people who are working on the messaging and the narrative and on justice and equity, who are organizing and incubating the next group of people I hope not to know by face recognition, and people whose policies are showing up all over this work because we're doing it together. And the reason why I get up and do this every day, which I think everyone on this panel and in this room can relate to, is that even in the world where we have all of this as it's slowly getting rolled back, we can't solve basic problems like these. So in thinking through how we could build a complicated mess that doesn't solve basic problems, there are things we are not doing. And part of what you touched on was the idea that we didn't end up here by accident. We got written into the law and out of our options. And this is a real brief snapshot of the history of all the ways we have been locked out of opportunity, out of our own money, out of our own wealth, out of our own understanding, and why we need an equity and justice lens to respond to climate change if we're gonna keep people out of it. So to keep from running over too much on my time and get the king to come out, I'm from New York, so sometimes the Sandman actually does come out and tell you to get off the stage. 350 is working on make them pay. So this is the year where we popularize the demand that we didn't end up here by accident. That all the money that's being spent to keep you out of Congress, to keep your voice from being heard in the Green New Deal space, to figure out how we're gonna pay for it, is because your money is being used against you by other people who have taken it improperly. And so what does it mean to open up a conversation about the history? How we got here and how our own dollars are being weaponized and bet against us. So I'm happy to talk outside of this context around what that means, but be sure that the word climate reparations will mean more to you a year from today than it does right now, because we want all of it. All of the assets that have delivered us to this moment are the assets that will deliver us out of it. And the only way we will pay for a Green New Deal is if we demand that we stop paying for stuff that's breaking our backs.
That's right.
So excited to talk about more of that. And my staff will come for me if I don't tell you to get involved in the Earth Day strikes. Labor is going for 10 days from Earth Day to May Day because they want to recognize that without working people, we cannot do this. So if you don't have anything to do in the month of April, I have several things for you to do, and we can talk about it. And for me, the most important target in all of that activity is insurance companies. Because if you've lived anywhere, you know for sure that the insurance man takes your money on the front end and is lucky if he knows your name at the end. That's true for people who have spent their money growing food. Black farmers, brown farmers, rural farmers, white farmers, every kind of farmer is going to watch climate change ruin their existence, their ability to do what they know how to do. And as they get told no for crop insurance, as they lose their shirts, and we can't get flood insurance or fire insurance in our communities, not a single pipeline, well pad, or compressor station can be built without an insurance license from the same companies. So you should be looking at AIG, Liberty Mutual, and Chubb to find out why your money is being used against you and why it doesn't serve you when you're in need. So I don't want to take up any more room here, but happy to talk about this later on.
If you don't mind, I'll stand up.
Oh, yeah.
My name is Charles Glass, Dr. Charles Glass. I am an environmental engineering professor for 20 years, at 17 at Howard University. And for the last 5 years, I've been on this executive experience with the state of Maryland, first in the Maryland Department of Transportation, and recently over the last 2 months with the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. So from my background at teaching at Howard and trying my NIA being to educate primarily African-American students in environmental engineering and environmental science, but also in engineering economics, which was a service course that I was educated to teach back at the University of Nevada, Reno, but then carried on to Howard. I wanted to teach young engineers that they would have the income to be independently wealthy by the time they were 40, and then to also always give back as environmental engineers or environmentally conscious civil engineers building structures, et cetera. So what I've done over the last few years is I've been able to access capital programs at the Maryland Department of Transportation to improve our performance on our Chesapeake Bay TMDL. So our TMDL program was $100 million a year. It was behind schedule in rolling out those funds. We were planting trees and not taking credit for our greenhouse gases, our greenhouse gas mitigation, and we were behind on meeting our nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment mitigation. So it was right-sized. We'll meet our permit by 2020 October this year, and I got a promotion to go to DNR and to try to work on some other programs that actually have an even larger impact on our bay and on climate change. So, and by the way, I'm new enough in my job that none of this is prepared, but I'm relying on teaching for 20 years and winging it. So my main pillars at DNR and how I would like to elicit assistance, and I did so at a Black History event in Silver Spring at the Civic Center on Wednesday night, MBEC. Herman Taylor invited me there. I've been given this direction. It's supported by my secretary, Jeannie Hatter-Riccio. It's supported by Governor Larry Hogan to improve. I started with diversity, inclusion, and environmental justice. Now I've been shared the term from staff that it's diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. But that was just new this week, so I'm pretty good for, new to the game. So I have all these ideas and programs. So the main thing is being an HBCU alum as a faculty member for 17 years. There are 4 HBCUs in the state of Maryland that are currently in a lawsuit, and hopefully that will settle this session. But we're behind on giving grants to the HBCUs, and we're behind on hiring our talented HBCU students in the state of Maryland. So I'm reaching out to the executive teams at all 4 institutions. I've started with Morgan, where I'm on their transportation center as a board member, and I'm going to try to reach them, but then obviously I know faculty, so I'm going to reach out to the faculty and ask them, please write for some of the grants that we give. DNR has a grant program for coastal bays. I believe the Chesapeake and Coastal Bay Trust Fund is $50 million a year, so I'm going to try to ensure that the HBCUs get grants for that, and that MBE companies, DBE companies also know that our programs exist at DNR. And as I owned my LLC for 17 years as I was a Howard faculty, I did not know that. And people were saying, I was always a resident of Maryland. People were saying, oh, well, there's none of us there. So I'm like, well, I have a PhD and a professional engineering license, and I was there, but you don't really market and advertise. That's why people don't come out of Prince George's County and Montgomery County to Annapolis to apply for grants and to get contracts. So that's a major pillar of my effort during the next 35 months that we have this administration. The other pillar is actually engaging with Chesapeake and Coastal Services to come up with a way to maximize our forests and park lands and to mitigate on those lands and to create a circular economy with getting actually my friends at the Maryland Department of Transportation, who constantly have to mitigate, and to actually reforest, continue to reforest all of our park and land. And if the land is already being inundated by saltwater intrusion on the eastern shore, to actually mitigate so that we can create buffers. There's an interesting a couple interesting technologies. One is called smart ponds, and it's not to get too deep into it. This was also a win at MDOT. There's a technology where you can have a solar array managing an actuator valve. I know this might be a little bit too much engineering on the downside of a dry pond or a wet pond. You'll be able to control the water level and slowly release so you mitigate stream erosion, which is a major problem when we have our water run off of our parking lots and our roofs. So that's been started in Howard County and Arundel County on the eastern shore. That can expand. It is much cheaper. So I also look for inexpensive methods. It's much cheaper. We brought our costs down from $150,000 an acre at MDOT to $25,000 an acre for the smart pond to $17,000 an acre for stream restoration. This, not to attack Pennsylvania, this brings down costs so low that even other states that are behind in their mitigation for the Chesapeake TMDL, they could actually get involved. And the last pillar I think I want to talk about is I have this great new project, and I'm so excited because I just found out about it last week. But how many people own a hybrid vehicle in the room? Hybrid electric vehicle, all right? How many own a full EV? Full EV, 1, 2, 3, all right? What we need to do is, if you really care about climate change, is we need to have solar-powered EV charging stations. So there's a grant from the Maryland Energy Administration. No time? All right, I'm out. I'll talk about that later, but I'm trying to improve the number of EV chargers. Thank you.
Don't start the clock. Hi, everybody. How's everyone this morning? We made it out the house. We dropped our kids off somewhere. Maybe, maybe not. We're here. I love that you brought I almost started choking up when you brought your children here. And the fact that they are so part of your story, the most obvious way, but they are so part of the work. Thank you for sharing. So thank you guys for having me here today. Thank you, Carolyn, wherever you are, for your vision. And thank you for what you do every day to push this work forward. It is because we are all in this together that we are literally here. I wrote some stuff. I hope to get to some stuff, but there's some things that have just moved me today that I have to talk about. The first of which is you. I'm looking at you. So Tamara and I went to the same law school. We have been sort of like in concentric circles, moving around for years. She said to me this morning, I was looking at her and I was like, I know you. And she was like, yes, I was interning at NRDC when you were there. And I saw you and you majoric harder and I knew I could do it. And I was like, you don't know what you just did for my spirit. It's a message to say you never know who's watching. And you are always serving as a role model for other people and paving the way. And we move in different spaces. Some of us are more public, some of us are more public in different moments. Some of us are deliberately not public. A lot of the work I do now, quite candidly. And that matters, that's important. Mustafa and I have overlapped. We both served in the Obama administration together. After the Obama administration, I went to NWF. He reached out, like Brandi. I left NWF and just needed to take a beat after a lot of our work was being repealed, including stream protection rules. So what you were just talking about with streams resonates, it breaks my heart, but moving on. And did something different because I wanted to focus on diversity and inclusion and how the corporate sector may or may not be getting it right. It was important to me because this space, quite frankly, has yet to get it right. But we're working on it, hence us being gathered here today. And Mustafa reached out, like, Brandi, I'm thinking about reaching out, doing some work with NWF. I was like, your time and talent is worthy. You decide where you want to spend it, and I wish you the best of luck. I think it's a good organization, and they could use your good work. So I'm so glad that you are there, moving that forward. And then I sit next to Dawone, who I've met for the first time today, but he's at NRDC, and that's where I got started in my career here. I was hired to do decoupling and energy efficiency. My eyes went cross-eyed, like, what does that mean? I don't know what that means. And they throw you out in the world, and you're forced to learn it very quickly. And I am very grateful for that experience, and you sound like you are rocking it, so it's good to know you. I was asked to speak today by, initially, Ari, who I would like to just lift up. Ari is a fierce advocate and champion for I think all things the environment, quite frankly, but she's often at our Green Bank meetings. The Green Bank is something that we are just starting. We have been sort of moving for the last 6 months with a board. It's a product of legislation. And what's really exciting about it is that we get to put money to work by leveraging public dollars. And essentially reducing some of the perceived risk around putting new financing tools in place. And they run the spectrum from commercial tools, but more for this sort of convening in this context, energy efficiency tools that help people when it's too expensive to go out and buy a new water heater, for example, that focus on affordable housing because that's one of our mayor's priorities. So I want to lay a little bit of context. Chocolate City is now 47% Black. It is one of the most educated cities in America. The median household is about $73,000 a year, and the average nationally is $55,000. And this is based on a couple of years ago, but it's still the baseline. Ward 3's median household income was $110,000. Ward 8, $32,000. Affordable housing remains a priority in DC. More than 40% of DC residents spend over a third of the monthly income on housing costs. When I was moving here for the second or third time, but to join the Obama administration from NRDC, I lived in New York, and I just knew I was going to have a lot more space. I was shocked, you all. It was a humbling moment. DC's population by 2032 is expected to reach 900,000 people. We are a very small city, 900,000 people. So sustainability is absolutely critical as we scale, and inclusivity around sustainability has to be hand in glove, and I think that's what all of us today stand for. In trying to do that, it's impossible to not think about net worth. And this will all fold into sort of some of the things that the Green Bank is trying to do. But the net worth of a white household in DC is 81 times higher than Black households. That's $284,000 versus $3,500.
So to your point about the impact on trying to care for multiple children who are dealing with asthma, who cannot go to school, we all know what it's like on a snow day and you're trying to figure out, how am I supposed to get it all done? It is an unrealistic proposition, and we should stop acting as though we can continue to put a Band-Aid on this cancer. So what does this all have to do with a green bank? I want to be crystal clear. This is not a magic bullet. This is a tool in the toolkit. This is something else for the war chest. It works at the intersection of solving the problem of sustainability and equity. It allows folks who would never venture into, let's say, affordable housing in a more scaled fashion, the willingness to do that because the city is putting more skin in the game. We are financed. We are exceptional in that we are a financed green bank. There are others that we have to learn from. Oh my gosh. And I'm out of time, you all. The only thing I want to say is that I can't stay with you for the whole day because I'm chairing the meeting shortly, as Ari knows, but I would love to stay in touch with you all, and Carolyn has my information. Thank you for the time.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I apologize for being late. Please don't tell my mom. She actually follows me, so she may be watching us online. It's good to see friends and family, and y'all know me. Many of you know me. You know I always give honor to my mother and my grandmother, the rocks that I stand on, and all this work that you see comes from the sacrifices that many people have done for us to be able to be in this room, for us to be able to engage, for us to just be. And the thousands of times that I've spoken in front of folks, I always use these words. And you know what? I did not use these words this morning. That's probably why I'm late. But every day I get up, I say I'm blessed and highly favored. And no matter where I am in the White House, or if I'm in a community meeting, or if I'm in another country, I always make sure that we have the proper energy. And I know the incredible folks who are behind me. So y'all try with me. I'm blessed and highly favored. And I know there's some heathens in the room today, so we're going to try one more time. I'm blessed, and highly favored. And we are, because we have the opportunity to actually help save lives. We have the opportunity to make real change happen. We have the opportunity to stand up and push back against injustice. And sometimes we forget that. People think because you're an environmentalist or because you are someone who focuses on conservation, they know a little better if you're somebody who focuses on environmental justice, that they got something on their hands. And that's the reason that we have to stay focused on the power that we have to make real change happen. All the projects that people have been sharing with you, all this work that people are doing has to be rooted in something. It has to be anchored. So we have these conversations, and they asked me to talk a little bit about climate change, to talk a little bit about voting, talk a little bit about culture. Well, you know, if we're going to have a conversation about climate change, then let's have some real discussions about how we got here. And we got here because many times of the environmental injustices, the environmental racism that was happening. And the fact that many of the organizations that we may work for now were not as concerned with what was happening in Black and brown and indigenous communities. So if we look disproportionately, you will find that most of the fossil fuel facilities are located in communities of color and lower income white communities. Right. If you look at the fossil fuel infrastructure, the 2.4 million miles of pipeline that Tamara and many others have fought against, they run through low income white land, they run through farmers' land, they end up in Black and brown communities on the Gulf Coast. But we couldn't get people to pay attention to that for a long time. If you look at our transportation routes, right? We've got 4 million miles of highways and roads. They were used in many instances to extract wealth from certain communities and move wealth into other communities. And what they left was pollution. So if you look at just those three areas, they are drivers in the warming up of our oceans and the warming up of our planet. So if we had paid attention to the injustices that were happening for decades, to the voices that no one could get to pay attention to the communities that were unseen, we wouldn't have the same level of problems that we currently have today. If we honored the experiences and the innovation and the expertise that exist in those communities, our policies would not look the way that they do. But the beauty is we finally are getting to a point now where people are beginning to come together.
Now, maybe they're coming together because there is an evolution that's happening inside of our country, inside of humanity. Or maybe folks are coming together because everybody now realizes that these impacts that are coming from the climate emergency, from this climate crisis that we're currently facing, are impacting everyone. And maybe, because I believe in real talk, are y'all okay with real talk?
Yeah,
Everybody say real talk.
real talk.
Maybe it was because you didn't see yourself reflected in the impacts that were happening when it was those coal-fired power plants or those incinerators or those petrochemical facilities that were just located in certain communities. So whatever the reason is, I'm blessed at the fact that we are now at a point where folks are coming together in authentic collaborative partnerships to help make real change happen. And the reason that that is so incredibly important, because when we talk about all of these challenges that are coming from climate change, we need to root it in the reality of what's actually happening in communities. By a show of hands, how many people have taken a breath in the last 60 seconds? Raise your hand. Find the non-air breathers. Keep your hand up because we want to know if there's any aliens in the room. Put your hands up if you're taking a breath of air. Real talk. 100,000 people are dying prematurely from air pollution every year in our country, and disproportionate is African American and Latinx folks who are the ones who are losing their lives. That's more than gun violence. That's more than car crashes. So why is it that we've got administrations that continue to roll back the basic protections? They gave me a 0. You shouldn't have gave me the microphone. When we have this type of thing going on, that is the anchoring that we need, and making sure that we are linking to climate change because it is going to expand. By a show of hands, how many folks know somebody who has asthma? Raise your hands. We got 25 million people in our country who have asthma. We got 7 million kids. And we know that our emergency rooms, unfortunately, are where many folks are ending up because we have folks who are uninsured and underinsured. You hear presidential candidates talking about that all the time, but they are not anchoring it in the reality of what's actually going on in communities, in rural communities and in urban communities. We have to be the ones who anchor this information. We have to be the ones who hold them accountable. I was waiting until it was 10 o'clock. It is now 10 o'clock. So I ran track in college, so I have this tick that goes on in my head. It is literally 10 o'clock. Right at this moment, it's 10:01. All right, well, my thing is slow. There's always one in the audience. Here's the reality of this time frame, whether it's 10 o'clock or 10:01. There are two men who are now standing up, Congressman McEachin and Chairman Grijalva. And for the first time ever, the Environmental Justice for All Act is being announced to the country at this moment. This is a powerful time because inside of that are the ideas and the innovation from thousands of leaders from across the country. And it's a shame that it's taken us this long to get to a point where we're going to have this bill that's introduced, but change is actually happening. So since I have 0 seconds left, I will just say a couple of last things. You have power. Your power is equated to your vote. The beauty, when I was at the hip hop caucuses, we had the Respect My Vote campaign, where we had artists and entertainers who were coming together with activists, making sure that those who traditionally didn't see value in their vote, didn't see access to the process, were actually realizing how real change can happen. The other part is that we have got to make sure that we are honoring, and I'm thankful for Tamara and 350 and many other organizations who are raising up and supporting young activists all across the planet, because that's how change is going to happen. So in closing, y'all do me a favor, and y'all know how I get down. Y'all look to the person to your left. Help your neighbor if they don't know their left. I don't know what's going on at HMMI. Look to the person to your other side. Reach your left hand out to the person on your left-hand side. Reach your right hand out to the person on your right-hand side. The coronavirus is not here yet, so you are safe, and we are at a medical institution. Everybody stand up, because we do not do anything on our knees, and we don't do anything sitting down. And as y'all doing that, I will say I'm at NWF, and we got 6 million members, and we're getting them real focused on social justice and environmental justice, and I'm thankful to Brandi for actually paving the way before I got there. But with all that being said, Dr. King shared, and you guys hear me talk about this all over the country, that we come to these shores in different ships, but we're all in the same boat now. Look around in the room. We are all in this boat fighting for climate change. We're fighting for environmental justice. We're fighting for social justice, health justice, transportation justice, and voter justice. But you have to be the ones that help to make that happen. So everybody do me a favor. Everybody say power. Power. Everybody say power. Power. Y'all got to know you actually got it. So this time, throw your hands up in the air, one on your right-hand side. Help your right-hand side. This time, say power to the people. Power to the people. Say power to the people. Power to the people. Last time, say it so the White House can hear it. You can tell them Mustafa sent you. Say power to the people. Power to the people. I'm Mustafa Santiago Ali. Thank y'all.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. We're all amazed by everything that our group of panelists, of what they say and what they do for us each and every day. So we're going to take some questions now, and we're going to try to offer some solutions moving forward, right? So I want to start out with the first question while all of you get your questions together. This question goes out to Tamara and Mustafa Ali. When it comes to politics and policy, has it been harder over the last couple of years? And going forward, what can all of us do?
Wow. So I'll start and say that the policy landscape is as difficult as it's ever been, except that we've lost a lot. So we have lost a lot at the state level. One of the most powerful set of words that have been yelled out from every corner in the last year is the Green New Deal. People are trying to figure out, what does that mean? That's about human health, jobs, and infrastructure. And what that looks like depends on you. There will be people who ask you to sign on to things that are neither green, neither new, and will not give you a deal. So if you are not paying attention to the fact that your human health has to be a part of the equation, there must be jobs for everybody, not jobs for people who are already jobbed alone. And we are thinking about the infrastructure, the roads, the railways, the internet, all of those things that make it so we can connect together. There is nothing that we can do together unless we solve all of that. And if we leave out Black, Indigenous, and people of color from the policy landscape, we will end up changing nothing and being closer to the end of our species. And that's not like a talking point, that is very real. So there are powerful things happening. Mustafa just started off with a really great piece of policy. One of the, Brandi talked about green banking. I have been a fan since Montgomery County was digging deep on all of that work for a long time and thinking through what it would mean to have national green banking. Because as the folks who are coming out of our shop are pushing for the end of fossil fuel capital, we have to build some other kind. Otherwise, we're just making each other apathetic, sad, and keeping the status quo going while being angry about it. So it's not just what we are against, which is the end of fossil fuels. We have to be for the things that we will build for the life we will live. That has to be a place where the world looks like us and we're all in it. So happy to kick it back to Mustafa, but I just think we have to recognize that the policy must respond to who we are now, not who we were.
Yeah, it's an interesting time. So, everybody lost their mind when Trump got elected. And I'm not getting political, so I ain't gonna get anybody in trouble. But it was also needed because the country had forgotten the truth about what many people were facing. So as others began to realize that their privilege was being eroded, they started to pay much more attention to the policies that were out there, to the lack of accountability that was built into the policies, and that you need to get engaged. And if you don't, these types of things actually happen. I see it a little bit different also in the sense that on the state level, there are lots of really positive policies that have come together, and in some instances on the county and city level around climate change. When they decided to remove us from the Paris Climate Accord, there were a number of folks who stood up and began to dig in on that. Now, that by no means means that there is not an incredible amount of work that still needs to happen in that space. And you've seen people come together and start to work together who had not traditionally done so. Whether we're talking about folks from the conservation space, working with folks maybe who are more in the social justice space. There are 20 bills now who are on Capitol Hill that have environmental justice language built into them. The first piece of environmental justice legislation was from John Lewis back in 1992, and then there became a desert for decades that nothing was moving forward. So there are positives that are happening. And I think that what we have to do is just really be aware of that and have to figure out how we make sure there are authentic coalitions that are being built, and that the voices of folks who have traditionally not been heard are actually leading in that process. And I'll just close with this, that there also have been a number of hearings on Capitol Hill, in the state houses, on the issues that we care about. So the question is, how do we take that momentum and build on that? And then how do we make sure that many of these extremely important pieces of legislation are actually passed? And how do we hold folks accountable after they're passed?
And I just want to, before the Maryland Climate Coalition comes for me, I just want to point out that we're in Maryland, and in this state, there are many great options going forth through a lot of coalitions that are coming together. One of them is for a constitutional rights amendment to the state constitution in Maryland that says you have the right to ask about your health when the state takes action or provides a process through a CPCN process at your Public Service Commission, which is another place you should be looking at for where a change could happen. There are other bills for health impact assessments at the Public Service Commission. It costs us nothing to have the same people who ask for a permit check the health records and find out if their work will make you sicker, and to have a 3-day meeting to tell you that it is coming. Before you're 2 years into a project, your health is already compromised and your children are facing a future that's harder to live with. So while there are big ideas happening in Capitol Hill, there are people fighting for what that means at the local level. There are people fighting for transportation that makes sense, that actually responds to people's problems. There are people fighting to close incinerators and make sure they stay closed in Baltimore City. So just to be clear, there are things that we could follow from the big Green New Deal roadmap that you could make happen in this session if you get involved, show up to a hearing, call someone they really love, hate when you do that, and or send them a postcard saying, I voted for you, I would like you to give me what you promised me.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. We're going to take 2 questions from the audience here. We've got someone standing over on the side who's got a cube, I believe, with a microphone where she'll be tossing it out to you. While we do, though, again, we have momentum. We have to keep the momentum going. That means getting family, getting friends involved at every level. Question right here.
I'm gonna toss it to you.
Heads up.
Heads up.
This is a question to Dwayne. We've made a lot of progress in Virginia since your speech. Can you talk about what's happened this session, and are we making real progress?
We are making some movement in Virginia. I think there are 9 days of session left, something like that. And I'm spending an hour with you all, so that's great. And then I'll actually head to Annapolis for a hearing, and then back down to Richmond later. We are making progress, and so there was a Green New Deal bill in the Virginia legislature that failed to pass. There is another Clean Economy Act, is what it's called, a larger omnibus bill that's going through that, as introduced, was good. As it currently stands, not so good. But we're making progress. I think that the takeaway for me is that change takes time, but the problem is that we don't have time. And for advocates, I think it's important to realize that time is out, and we don't need to compromise anymore. And we have been told a lot within the environmental and climate space that we have to accept a little bit. Accept a little bit here, accept incrementalism, make a little bit of progress here and there. But for the climate movement at large, and particularly for Black and brown communities, that's not good enough. That we need to demand more, because we have been on the other side of that ledger and have been hammered over the head with environmental degradation and environmental pollution. Mustafa quoted Martin Luther King earlier. There's a quote that I look to within the environmental space, that during his I Have a Dream speech, Dr. King recites that there have been those that have said, when will you be satisfied? Like in Virginia, like, okay, we've made a little bit of progress. We've given you a little wind. We've given you a little solar. Aren't you satisfied? The answer should be a resounding no. And Dr. King said that we are not satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. We have to demand better, and until we get that, the answer should be clearly no.
We have one more question in the back. Yes, sir.
Yes, could you say a few words about the increased risk for poor black kids playing on artificial turf fields and the increased risk for the disposal of those artificial turf fields when they wind up going to private landfills because the municipal landfills and the incinerators won't take them, and private landfills, as I'm sure you know, is code words for poor black kids. And specifically, do you support HB 1098, which prohibits using program open space funds to convert grass fields to dead plastic fields?
We could just get one answer so we can get caught up on time. I know that's a lot, but if we can just address one item here.
A thing happened up here. So the answer is yes, because asking children to run on plastic instead of grass when one is killing them and one isn't is not a real question.
Right.
But the other thing is that there was some issues here, and I'm not going to speak for my colleague, I'm happy to speak up, but that it isn't just poor black kids, it's all the kids. All the kids. Some of them are poor, some of them are black, all of them are kids.
I like to speak to the word poor because poor is a state of mind. And I, even though I am impoverished, I am not poor. I am indeed rich and my father. So I would like for us to be very careful about the words that we use. I would never call my children poor or anybody for that fact. You know, there's just so much work that we have to do. And you know, and I want to speak to the consensus here. Local work, grassroots work, is some of the most devalued and overlooked work that there is. Our contributions as being grassroots workers have been devalued and deemed not credible. And I want to speak to that as a grassroots worker, because most of the time when you all are looking to get certain information, you always look to those that are closest to our legislators or what have you. But you also can get very valuable work and very valuable contributions from those that are boots on the ground, that are in the communities, that are doing the work, that have the experience, that are living the experience. And so, you know, when you do that and you single out who you ask the question to, it says to everybody else who's doing that work that you're not valuable. And I just want to make you all aware of that.
Again, I would like to thank our panelists for being part of today's first discussion. We're all, again, amazed by what you do each and every day. I think the takeaway here is to get involved in your communities, your schools, your neighborhood associations, because we're all part of the solution in fixing what's broken.
Two more
Thank
questions,
you so very
please.
much.
I think the cube people are signaling to you.
Yes.
I just had a question.
The last question. We really
Okay.
need to get back on time.
Appreciate it. Do you, I guess this is just a general question for anyone on the panel, but do you believe that, you know, some people would say that like pollution is the problem with climate change, you know, like all the pollution that's being put out into the air, but would you say that actually it might be something else like inherent flaw in the societal like structure of things and like the value of money over or how we see money as value for anything. We can buy anything with money, right? So yeah, would you think that just that the goal of getting more money is causing the pollution, which is causing climate change? Like, what are your guys' thoughts on that?
Very good question. There's a lot of contributors to the climate policy, and definitely money. When you look at governments that want to build more infrastructures, like you're dropping policy. Richmond is a big one, Newport News, Norfolk. We're just building. We're knocking down trees. We're not replacing the trees, and we're looking at governments are looking at revenue and profits that are being brought in, so it's profits over people. So most definitely it's money, it's pollution, it is big pharma. All of these things contribute to the climate crisis.
Great question. Thank you very much. We're going to move on to our next session now. If you can give a round of applause, please, for our panelists.
Ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. I'm gonna lay down my sword and shield down by the riverside. Down by the riverside. Whoa.